Okay, so picture this, right? It's 1970. You're on a flight, maybe sipping a cocktail, excited about your vacation, and suddenly there's a guy standing up, waving a gun around, saying he's taking the plane to Cuba.
Sounds like a movie, right?
Right. Crazy, huh? But this was actually happening all the time back in the 60s and 70s. Hijackings were so common back then, it was like they were a regular thing on the news.
It's hard to imagine now, isn't it? Airport security was basically non-existent back then. No metal detectors, no ID checks, nothing.
Yeah, no kidding.
You could just walk onto a plane with, well, anything, really.
It's no surprise there were something like over 140 hijackings just in the U.S. between 1968 and 1972.
Yeah, over 140.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it.
Hmm.
So for this deep dive, you guys wanted us to dig into this whole skyjacking thing, and we've got some really interesting stuff to go through. We're looking at this episode of the American History Hit podcast, where they talk to this historian, John Wigger.
Oh, yeah, I know him. He wrote The Hijacking of American Flight 119, right?
Yep, that's the one. And he really breaks down this whole era. We're going to get into some crazy stories like this guy, Martin McN. His hijacking story is nuts, even for the 1970s.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about that one.
Yeah, it's a wild one. But one thing that's interesting is how different things were back then.
Yeah.
Like our whole idea of security and freedom has totally changed.
Totally. I mean, today we can't imagine getting on a plane without going through like a million security checks.
Exactly. But back then, hijackings were often seen as like a political statement,
Yeah.
a way to protest U.S. policies, especially during what Wigger calls the Take Me to Havana era.
Ah, right, right.
A lot of these hijackings were aimed at Cuba. And get this, they sometimes ended up being, well, kind of nice experiences for the passengers.
Wait, what?
Yeah, seriously. The Cuban government saw these hijackings as like PR opportunities. They treat these hijacked passengers like VIPs, hotels, nightclubs, meetings with government officials, the whole 9 yards.
Wow, a forced vacation. That's a new one.
Right. It's crazy. But of course, Cuba couldn't keep doing that forever. And as their stance on hijackings changed, so did the hijackings themselves.
Makes sense. As Cuba got less, welcoming, hijackers had to find new reasons, new places to go.
Exactly. And that's when we see this rise of extortion hijackings.
Oh, right, where they started demanding money.
Yeah, big money. But that created a whole new problem.
You gotta get away with the cash.
Bingo. And that's where the parachute hijackers come in. These guys weren't interested in politics or vacations. They wanted the money, plain and simple. And they were willing to risk it all to get it.
And this is where D.B. Cooper comes in.
Yep, the most famous hijacker ever.
Yeah.
1971, he gets $200,000, jumps out of a plane, and disappears.
Vanished into thin air.
Oof, gone. And people are still talking about it today.
I've read so many theories about what happened to him.
Me too. But his escape, it inspired a bunch of copycats.
Oh, like the guy we're talking about today.
Exactly. Martin McN and the hijacking of American Airlines Flight 119. This story has so many twists and turns, it's like something out of a movie.
I'm ready. Tell me everything.
All right, so first, let's set the scene. It's June 1972 in St. Louis. Imagine a Brinks truck pulling up to a bank after closing time.
Late night money drop.
Right. Inside, there are two guys counting a huge pile of cash. $500,000.
$500,000. Wow.
Yeah, and get this. They're microfilming each bill and writing down the serial numbers by hand.
No fancy machines back then, huh?
No, it was a slow process. They load up the first batch of cash, like $12,500 into the truck, and they're about to go back for the rest when, well, this wasn't your typical bank robbery. This was ransom for a hijacker.
That's right. Martin McN waiting on a plane at the airport with hostages.
You got it. And here's the thing. McGinn had planned almost every detail, even though he had zero experience. He bought a ticket to Tulsa using a fake name, packed a sawed-off machine gun, a pistol, and a fake grenade. Even a wig and sunglasses for his getaway.
Sounds like he thought of everything.
He was trying. But his parachute training was non-existent. He basically tried to learn everything from the library.
Oh no, serious.
Seriously. And it's crazy how easy it was to get on a plane back then. Can you imagine trying to get through security today with all that stuff?
Not a chance. They tackle you before you even got close.
Right. So anyway, McKinns gets on the plane on June 23rd. And he's actually having trouble going through with his plan at first. It wasn't until they were almost at Tulsa that he finally makes his move.
Okay, so what happened?
He goes to the bathroom, puts on his disguise, comes out with his gun, and gives the pilots a note with his demands.
And those were?
Super specific.
Yeah.
$500,000, mostly small bills, so it wouldn't be too heavy.
Yeah.
5 parachutes, 2 shovels, And an extra $2,500 for spending money.
He was determined, I'll give him that, even if he wasn't exactly qualified.
Right. So his plan was to jump out near Detroit, where he had a friend waiting.
Mm.
But there's a problem right off the bat. Getting $500,000 on a Friday night wasn't exactly a quick trip to the ATM.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The FBI and FAA were stalling, hoping to wear McGann down.
But even without that, it took hours to get the money from the bank in St. Louis, count it all, and get it to the airport. Then they had to find the parachutes and the rest of the stuff you wanted.
Meanwhile, you have a plane full of people just flying around with a hijacker and a potential bomb.
Yeah.
Talk about stressful.
Oh, yeah. It must have been terrifying.
It's amazing the stewardesses kept things calm. They were really the unsung heroes back then, calming passengers, talking to the hijackers, sometimes even outsmarting them.
Absolutely. They went above and beyond. But then this whole hijacking takes this crazy turn when this guy, David Hanley, decides to take matters into his own hands.
Wait, what? What did he do?
So he's watching the whole thing unfold from a rooftop bar across from the airport, and he just decides he's had enough.
Okay, yeah.
Gets in his wife's Cadillac convertible and rams it through the airport fence.
He did not.
He did. It took him 2 tries to get through, and then he just floors it toward the plane.
Like a movie chase scene. For real.
Yeah.
The pilots see these headlights coming at them and have no idea what's going on.
I bet.
Hanley slams into the front of the plane, a 727, going 90 miles an hour.
Oh my gosh. What happened to him?
Somehow, he survived. The plane, though, not so much. It was damaged, leaking fuel. They had to get a new one.
Wow. And what about McMurrin? How did he react to all this?
He totally freaked out. Thought it was the FBI trying to storm the plane.
Makes sense, I guess.
The pilots and stewardesses did their best to calm him down. They even told him that people hit planes on the runway all the time.
Like it was no big deal.
Exactly, like just another Tuesday at the airport. Finally, they convince him to switch to the new plane.
So they get the new plane, they have the ransom money. It seems like everything is finally going according to his plan.
Right, you'd think so. But that's where things get even crazier.
So picture this. Martin McInerney. He's just crash landed in a field in the middle of nowhere. It's Indiana. It's the middle of the night. He's lost his $500,000. Doesn't even know where he is. You'd think he'd be freaking out, right?
Yeah, totally. But McConnell, well, he's a pretty resourceful guy, even if his plans don't always, work out.
That's for sure. So he hides in the woods during the day, and then as it gets dark, he figures he's got to find some help get back to civilization.
Okay, so what does he do?
Starts walking down this country road, hoping to find a town or something. And who does he run into? The Peru, Indiana chief of police, Richard Blair, out for a drive with his wife.
Oh, wow. What are the chances?
Right. Talk about bad luck. Well, for McCann, anyway.
So Blair sees this guy, McNaught, walking along the road and stops to see if he needs help. And McDonald's got to be thinking, this is it. Game over.
You'd think so, right? But remember, this is the guy who planned a hijacking based on library books. He's good at thinking on his feet.
Okay, so what does he do?
He comes up with this whole story, says he was driving his brother's car, got into a fight with him, and needs to get back to Detroit.
And Blair believes him.
Well, it's a pretty weak story, but yeah, somehow Blair buys it. I guess in 1972, small-town cops weren't expecting to run into a hijacker who just jumped out of a plane.
Times were different then, that's for sure. But here's the kicker. Instead of taking McNabb to the police station, Blair drives him into town and drops him off at the only motel in Peru. That motel. It was where all the FBI agents investigating the hijacking were staying.
No way, seriously.
Seriously, it's like something out of a comedy. Here's McNabb, the most wanted man in the state, maybe even having breakfast with the guys who are trying to catch him.
That is too funny.
I know, right? McVen spends 3 nights at the FBI's motel before finally getting a friend to drive down from Detroit and pick him up.
So the FBI's out there searching high and low, probably assuming he's dead or hiding in some ditch.
Right. They were so focused on finding a body that they didn't even consider he might be alive and just blending in.
It shows how our assumptions can really mess things up, even for pros like the FBI.
Totally. But, there's a golden rule when it comes to getting away with something. Don't brag.
Ah.
And McSen, well, he couldn't resist.
Oh, no. He told people.
He couldn't help himself. He showed off his cuts and bruises from the jump, told his friends about the money he lost. Classic rookie mistake.
What a dummy.
And, of course, one of those friends had already talked to the FBI.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They were going through all of McGann's contacts, trying to figure out what happened. So when this friend spills the beans, the FBI finally realizes, wait a minute.
They'd been outsmarted by a small-town cop and a free continental breakfast.
Exactly. They were probably pretty embarrassed. So they track McGinn down in Detroit and arrest him. And even though he didn't hurt anyone during the hijacking, he gets 37 years in prison.
37 years. That seems harsh, especially compared to some of the other
It
hijackers.
does, doesn't it? But I think it shows how seriously people were starting to take these hijackings.
Yeah, after all those parachute hijackings in 72, people were fed up. It wasn't a joke anymore. It was a real threat.
Right, and McGinn's escape and his bragging probably didn't help his case.
Probably not. It's crazy how something random like that guy crashing into the plane can have such a big impact.
It really is. But it just goes to show history is full of unexpected twists and turns.
Absolutely. But before we move on, let's talk more about what these parachute hijackings tell us about the hijackers themselves. I mean, it wasn't easy to jump out of a 727. Those stairs weren't designed for it. The wind, the landing, it was super dangerous.
Yeah, you'd have to be pretty desperate to try it.
Exactly. These guys were after a big payout, and they were willing to risk their lives for it.
It's like a high-stakes gamble, but with their lives on the line. But what about the psychology of it all? What drove them to do this?
That's a good question. John Wigger, the historian, he pointed out that a lot of these hijackers had military backgrounds.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. He thinks there might be a connection to PTSD or some other trauma from their time in the service.
It makes sense. After experiencing war, some people might have trouble adjusting back to normal life.
Right, and they might be drawn to risky things, like hijacking, to feel that same sense of control or purpose they had in the military.
And maybe some of them saw it as a way to get back at a system they felt had failed them.
It's definitely complicated. There's no one-size-fits-all explanation. But understanding the psychology behind it can help us see these events in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to just focus on the crazy parts, the escapes, the money. But there are real people behind these stories with their own reasons and struggles.
Exactly. And we can't forget the stewardesses either. They were often caught in the middle of these tense situations.
Right. They weren't just serving drinks. They were calming people down, talking to the hijackers, sometimes even helping to stop them.
They were incredibly brave. Their stories often get lost in all the drama, but they played a crucial role.
Absolutely. They really showed how strong and resilient people can be, even in the face of danger.
That's a good point. Even in the darkest times, there are always those glimmers of hope and humanity.
I like that. Well, I think this is a good place to take a break. We've talked about the motivations of the hijackers, the role of the stewardesses, and the impact of these events on society. But there's still more to cover.
Right. In part 3, we'll look at what finally put an end to this crazy era of skyjacking and how it changed air travel forever.
So we've been talking about this crazy time of skyjacking, the parachute hijackers, why they did it, and how those brave stewardesses kept everyone safe. It's a wild part of aviation history, for sure.
It really is. And even though these stories seem like ancient history, they actually tell us a lot about how we deal with threats and how our ideas about risk change over time.
Okay, I'm curious. What do you mean?
Well, for years, airlines didn't want to make security stricter. They were worried it would be a hassle for passengers and people wouldn't want to fly as much.
Makes sense, I guess. From a business perspective, at least.
Right. But then you had all these hijackings, especially those parachute ones in 72. And that's when things finally changed. Public opinion shifted, and the airlines had to do something.
So it wasn't just about the technology or the logistics. It was about how people saw the danger of flying.
Exactly. What used to be like a minor annoyance, something you might skim in the newspaper, became a big national security issue.
It's amazing how quickly things can change when people start to feel unsafe.
It really is. And it wasn't just the airlines. Remember how we talked about the FBI's reaction to those parachute hijackings? They were so sure that jumping out of a 727 at 10,000 feet was basically a death sentence.
Right.
And that made them miss the fact that these guys could actually survive, blend in, and even stay hidden for a while.
Like they were so focused on one thing that they missed all the other clues.
Exactly. Even experts can get stuck in their ways, especially when something as crazy as a parachute hijacking happens. But you know what finally put a stop to all this skyjacking?
What's that?
Something super simple. Security checks before you get on the plane.
You mean metal detectors and checking bags?
Yep. In January 1973, the FAA said all airlines had to do it. It seems obvious now, but back then, it was a huge change.
I bet some people weren't happy about it. Having their bags searched, walking through metal detector.
Oh, there were definitely complaints about delays and costs and privacy, but after years of worrying about hijackings, most people were ready for it. They knew a little inconvenience was worth it for the extra safety.
And did it work?
It did. Hijackings went down a lot after that. It wasn't perfect, and there were still some incidents, but stricter security, people's changing attitudes, and countries like Cuba not being so welcoming to hijackers anymore, all of that pretty much ended the golden age of skyjacking.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? All those terrifying events actually led to a safer way to travel. Makes you appreciate those long security lines a little more, huh?
It does. Those little things we do at the airport are reminders of what we've learned from a pretty crazy time in history.
Well said. So we've gone back in time to the world of 1970 skyjacking, learned about those parachute hijackers, and heard about Martin McKean's wild ride.
And we've seen how much things have changed, how creative people can be, and how important it is to stay alert and adapt to new dangers.
What really stuck with you about this whole era?
For me, it's that our feeling of safety is really fragile. It depends on what we've gone through, what we hear about, and how our society sees things. What seems crazy today could be normal tomorrow, and the other way around.
That's a good point. It makes you realize how important it is to think critically and question what you believe, especially as things change around us.
Exactly. And history is full of surprises. Even the craziest stories can be true, and looking back can teach us how to deal with the present and the future.
Well, that's a great place to wrap things up. We've learned a lot in this deep dive into skyjacking history, about why hijackers did it, how brave those stewardesses were, and how society changed things to end that era.
It shows how even when things are scary and uncertain, people can still be clever and strong.
If you liked learning about this, make sure you subscribe to our podcast for more deep dives into history. We love to hear from you too. What surprised you the most about all this? How does it connect to what's going on in the world today? Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those seatbelts fastened.